Hello and welcome to All Right, Now What? I'm your host, Andrea Gunrad from the Canadian Women's Foundation. Gender equality and justice where we live, work, learn, and play is the goal, and it makes life better for everyone. This podcast is our chance to connect with insightful people and explore what it'll take to get there in Canada. The work of the Canadian Women's Foundation and our partners takes place on traditional First Nations, Métis, and Inuit territories. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet and work on this land. However, we recognize that land acknowledgements are not enough. We need to pursue truth, reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship in an ongoing effort to make right with all our relations. In this episode, I'm interviewing Dr. Chika Stacy Oriuwa, author of her 2024 memoir, Unlike the Rest, A Doctor's Story. Dr. Oriuwa is a graduate from the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine, where she was named valedictorian in 2020. She is a physician, professional spoken word poet, international public speaker, writer, and champion of authentic leadership through genuine human connections. She's completing her residency in psychiatry at the University of Toronto, where she aims to go on to subspecialist training in forensic neuropsychiatry. Dr. Oriuwa has served on many boards, building equal opportunity and curating spaces of wellness and artistic expression. She is a recipient of many prestigious awards and honors, chosen as one of Best Health Magazine's 2020 Women of the Year and Time Magazine's Next Generation Leaders. She was honored in Mattel's Thank You Heroes campaign, alongside 5 other women with a one-of-a-kind Barbie doll made in her image to commemorate her contributions as a frontline healthcare worker. I start by asking Dr. Oriuwa to do the Gender Equality Changemaker quiz we launched earlier this year as part of our new Count Me In initiative for a Gender Equal Canada. Please check it out yourself at yescountmein.ca.
I want to start off by saying that I absolutely loved the questions, and for so many of the answers, I was like, I could see myself doing a little bit of each of these things. Where's the all the above? That was the one resounding thought that I had felt, because I really do view myself as a shapeshifter. Like, I am able to become whatever the situation almost needs. But I really did appreciate being challenged with having to choose one specific kind of thing. And, the foremost bucket that I fell under was the creator, which honestly wasn't very surprising to me as someone who has been writing their entire life. I started to write thoughts out of my brain and onto the paper when I was 5, 6 years old. Only a few years actually realizing that what I was writing was poetry, but at the time, I was just writing what I felt in my heart. Then spending the rest of my life using the power of words to not only heal myself, but also restore others. That force of creative nature that was within me has always been the guiding light of the work that I do. And so it's entirely unsurprising to me that creator was the biggest category that I fell under. The next after that was collaborator, which again is not surprising. I think that bit of itself, that bit of my personality lends itself well to my career in medicine, which has to be very collaborative, especially in psychiatry. We need to work in an interdisciplinary fashion. And then I was a challenger. That was the third one. And I think that, again, speaking to my other hat as an advocate, my other hat as someone who is very vocal, and I'm a public speaker, and a lot of my poetry also challenges the way that we view the world. And so I just think that, once again, makes sense. And then the last one was a connector, which I am a little bit surprised by, but I guess like these things have to be split up in some way. I do love connecting with other people. And ironically, my keynote that I'm now launching this fall is all about human connection. And so I do find connecting to be really fascinating, but I guess the other elements just won out.
When people want you to talk, they want you to talk about, what it's like to be a doctor, a Black woman in medicine, what your experiences were. What was it like to have a Barbie made after you? But I actually want to hone in on your writing, because your writing is so important to your heart, so important to your journey, to your life as a kid. That's how you saw yourself. I'd like you to tell us a bit about your writing journey and what the idea of just telling your story means to you today?
Oh, I'm honestly over the moon by by this question because writing to me is as natural as breathing. And as a child, I remember some of my earliest memories of my life are me sitting with my journal and just writing whatever came into my heart. And I often view writing, and specifically writing poetry, almost as something that happens to me. Because throughout my life, I will oftentimes like wake up or just feel like I have this strike of genius and just have this stanza in my head that I have to get out. And I don't even exactly know where it originated from. And it almost feels like I'm a creative vessel or a creative channel, and that these experiences just kind of happen to me. And then I just create this poetry and I stand back, and it almost doesn't make sense how it's like how I string these things together. But that to me is just the most natural thing that my mind and my body does. And so I'm I feel like I've been incredibly blessed with this creative gift to write. And some of the earliest experiences for me when I really recognized that my words were transcendent was when I wrote a poem for my mother in the weeks after my maternal grandmother's death, when my mother was just enveloped by grief. And I wrote her this poem from the perspective of my grandmother in heaven looking down on my mom and telling her that it was going to be okay and that she was always going to watch over her. And it was the first time in weeks that I saw my mother smile. And then that for me planted the seed within myself that although I had this childhood aspiration to pursue medicine, that medicine wasn't the only way to heal. And that was reaffirmed to me when I was 12 years old. And it was the first time that I performed my poetry in a public forum. It was at a school assembly for Remembrance Day, and there was a veteran in the crowd. And by the end of it, he stood up and he was crying and applauding. And that for me, once again, reaffirmed the transcendent power of words. And so to then spend the rest of my life kind of carrying this balance between my love of creative expression and writing and poetry and my love for science and biology and all things medicine, then to finally have this opportunity to write this book just feels like this beautiful culmination of a lifetime of effort and admiration and just true love of words and medicine.
I'd love to ask you about your deepest learning. You know, you got a chance to reflect and put it down on paper and edit and think it through. What core life lesson in this project of building gender equality, and you know, intersectional gender equality is all the things, all the joy and the freedoms and the rights and the support and the power that we need. I'd love you to share that with us and tell us a bit about what was the thing that it all distilled to that we can take from this and learn from.
So I also really love this question. And I love that we are meeting today because it was just this morning that I finished writing a new poem. And it's called Love Letters from My Body. And it's actually based on what I learned about myself from this book. So within my book, unlike the rest, A Doctor's Story, which is ostensibly about my journey through medicine, one can see and glean that I really struggled with disordered eating throughout my entire life. And that really peaked for me in different chapters of my life, primarily immediately before applying into medical school and again in medical school. And this really turbulent, chaotic relationship that I had with my body, and what it took for me to really struggle with that throughout medical school. And then in residency, when I became pregnant with my son, and then quickly thereafter, my daughter, being on this healing journey and really coming to radically accept my body as a woman and also my story, and not to be ashamed of this story, which is the one story that, despite all of the stages that I have been on, all the interviews I have done, all of the articles I have written, I've never talked about my eating disorder. And I didn't do it because I was so ashamed of it. And so to be able to put it into writing, the one thing that I learned about myself is that A, I don't need to be ashamed of my story, because often when we think of someone with an eating disorder, we don't think of a late 20s Black woman. We think of, usually the archetype is a white teenage girl, right? That's the average patient that we think about. And so what it took for me to reconcile that cognitive dissonance and then realize more than anything that I am a human in evolution, that my story, my journey of healing is not always going to look linear, and it's not ever going to be finished. And that is okay for me to accept, that I am in this evolution. And it is okay to also look back in reflection and to just be so damn proud of how far I have come. What it took for me to recite that poem to my mom this morning, who for years I couldn't even she couldn't digest that conversation, no pun intended, but she really couldn't. So to be able to sit across from her and read and recite and perform that poem for her, it signaled to me that I'd reached a real point of understanding with my body.
I'm going to ask you about your passion, the top gender equality issue you're most passionate about, and why it's important. But it's not one issue that you're thinking is important here. You want to look at it from lots of different perspectives, and that's what I'm getting from you. Share with us the things that you're passionate about, plural, and where your head is at right now, given all the things that you've experienced, the way that you've written it down, processed it, share it so far, and where you're going to take it from here.
When it comes to this topic of women's issues that I'm passionate about, it is so multifaceted. I've alluded to the idea of women's mental health, especially as it pertains to the intersectionality of bringing light to and speaking truth to the experiences of women, and how it is that we engage with our body, how it is that we radically accept our body, particularly for me, especially in the last few years, perinatal mental health is just an explosive topic that I have so much more profound appreciation for, having had two children in 2 years and recognizing that, my goodness, there is a dearth of mental health that needs to be addressed amongst women who are going through this, especially mothers who return to work outside of the home, because there's always work inside the home, which is should not be ignored and should be valued, but returning to work outside of the home, and how it is that society still has not got it right. We still have not found ways to allow a mother to be a mother, but also be a woman out in the world, contributing to society, being entrepreneurial, being career driven. We still have not gotten it right. That has been very much declared for me in the last 3 years, as I struggle to balance these things in a very fine way. And then, of course, as it pertains once again to Black women's maternal health, and how it is that Black women are still, giving birth is one of the riskiest thing a Black woman can do. And that discussion still very much needs to be had. And so these things I'm so incredibly passionate about. It's almost October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and something that I'm really passionate about as well. I write about in my book, Unlike the Rest, that my mother struggled with DCIS, ductal carcinoma in situ, which is like stage 0 breast cancer, like right before it's cancerous. But she had to go through the mastectomy and the radiation, and what it was like for me as a 10-year-old girl to look up to this woman who was and still is my superhero, and see her in that very fragile and vulnerable state and not really know how to make sense of it. The story of breast cancer and how it impacts Black women differently and disproportionately, and having a higher cases of mortality for younger Black women. Like, there's just so many conversations that need to be unpacked there. And so, I mean, I could go on for another 10 women another 10 minutes about all the topics of women's health that I am passionate about, but those are definitely amongst the top.
What's one thing that we can do to start closing this gap, especially the intersectionality gaps where we're just not recognizing there's a history as to why we're not recognizing women's health, certainly not racialized women's health, certainly not younger racialized women's health in that way. And you're an insider in medicine, and then you're also one step outsider as well too. How can we close this gap?
I believe that the first step is being able to have honest and vulnerable conversations, not just about where we are right now, which is so incredibly important, but where we've been. Because if we don't understand the elements that have created that history, we are destined to repeat it. Truly having an understanding of how it is that these inequities arose will allow us to be able to move forward collectively and more strongly. And so I think that's only possible by ensuring that all voices are given an opportunity to be heard. And that's why I feel so incredibly honored to be able to sit on the board of this incredible charity called Unsinkable, which is a charity that talks about narrative medicine and talking about mental health through storytelling. And I think that the power of a single story cannot be overestimated. There's so much that individuals can glean from, especially within a clinical capacity, from hearing about the stories, whether that's told in a creative or poetic way or artistic way, where it can resonate in a different way with the recipient that other forms of communication cannot do. And so I just think that that kind of storytelling needs to be so protected. And I also think it needs to be uplifted, especially in more conservative spaces like medicine.
I hear people saying, protect women, protect trans folks, protect people who are marginalized. I think protect and honor our stories is the way that you do so much of that protecting and bringing things to a better place. One powerful takeaway as we close: give our listeners something that can help us be better gender equality change makers, no matter who we are.
Give women every single opportunity to shine. I feel like the world oftentimes they're afraid of a woman who is completely and fully empowered, you know, especially if that woman is a woman of color or a woman of a different intersectionality. But I believe that when we allow women to be fully empowered, the world will ultimately be changed for the better. I really do hope that when someone reads this book, they will recognize that it is not only to empower yourself, it's important to not only empower yourself, but also strive to empower every single woman in your life, especially the women who are juggling a million different roles. And I think that ultimately the world will be a better place afterwards.
All right, now what? If you want to make sure no woman, girl, two-spirit, trans, or non-binary person feels out of options, out of sight, out of time, or out of mind, visit yescountmein.ca today. When you count yourself in, you'll join over 82,000 people in the Canadian Women's Foundation's generous and active community. You'll get tools and opportunities to advance gender equality. This movement needs you. Visit yescountmein.ca and count yourself in today. Please listen, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. If you appreciate this content, please consider becoming a monthly donor to the Canadian Women's Foundation. People like you will make the goal of gender justice a reality. Visit CanadianWomen.org to give today, and thank you for your tireless support.